In this video, we're just going to talk about one theory in particular. So I want to spend a little bit of time now as a preview to some of the conversation we'll have in a few weeks, thinking about the role of social context. So many of the theories that we've been talking about focus on the learner or focus on the learner engaging with other individuals. But there are also some really important theories of second language acquisition that urge us to think about the social context and groups of learners or groups of people as we think about second language acquisition. Schumann introduced what he called the acculturation model as a way to think about the role of social context and the role of power in shaping why certain learners seem to make rapid progress in second language acquisition, while others with similar instruction and time do not. So Schumann argued that this difference could be accounted for by characteristics of social and psychological distance that learners had between themselves and the language that they were learning. So a lot of this, again, is focused on group factors. So he asked kind of what is the social distance between the groups, the language group that person belongs to who's learning the new language and the new language group, and how might that be impacting language acquisition? So for example, as I noted on Brightspace, an Italian immigrant to Rhode Island might have an easier time acquiring English than when compared to an immigrant from Haiti who arrived in Rhode Island at the same time and is also learning English. And some of that has to do with social dominance patterns. Do English speakers and the speakers of the group that person is a member of hold similar levels of power in terms of the power that they wield economically, power that they wield socially, culturally. And if one group is more superior to others or viewed as more superior, that might make it more challenging to learn. How integrated is that person and that group within the society within which they're learning that new language? If a person in a group is quickly integrated, it can be easier to learn the language, right? If they give up their own home language, values, lifestyles, culture, that might help with language learning. Now, it also might have other consequences, right? The loss of sense of identity and self. It's not always great to assimilate, but he argued that assimilative learners do often acquire the language more easily, right? So there's that give and take. And again, he's not saying that one way is better than the other. He's just arguing that these are factors that certainly impact how somebody learns a language. Enclosure, so how kind of isolated is that community from others, which kind of relates to integration pattern. Cohesiveness, is there a lot of contact between one group and the group of the other language community? Size, so if there's a really large sized group, they might not be integrating as quickly, right? So if there's a large group of immigrants living in Rhode Island from the Dominican Republic, and they are always together, always speaking Spanish, you could imagine that might impact the way that some of them are learning English. And again, this is not an argument for assimilation. It's just an argument that those types of factors might impact how somebody is acquiring a language, how quickly. If they are the only person in their community who speaks that language, and all of their friends speak English, then that child might have no choice but to acquire English so they can interact socially. Whereas if there are other people around them who can speak their home language, they might not need to be using English in those moments. There's also the question of attitudes and cultural congruence. So the similarity between the culture of one group and the culture that is connected to the language that's being acquired, the attitudes that the groups feel towards one another. So all of these can impact language acquisition, and also how long that group plans to stay, or that immigrant family plans to stay, certainly impacts the way in which the investment that somebody might feel towards learning a language. So again, all of these are factors, he argues, that do impact language acquisition. He also identified some individual factors. So he talked about these psychological factors like language and culture shock, motivation, and ego permeability, or the extent to which a second language learner views their first language as fixed and rigid, will impact how they learn a new language. So all useful things to consider. We'll continue to talk about social context and the ways in which we've continued to think more critically and deeply about these different factors. But it is useful to think that, to understand that language acquisition does not just happen on an individual level, but there are these group factors that are influencing to what extent someone will have success as they're working to acquire a new language. And certainly, as I mentioned before, these are complex factors, right? And assimilating may help with language acquisition, but also may have a lot of detrimental effects. So thinking about these factors from that kind of more complex understanding is always important. And that is all for this video.